the current issues facing Jewish nonprofits. We are privileged to have three leaders from various different areas of the Jewish world. We have Gali Cooks to my left, Program Director at the Rita and Stanley Kaplan Family Foundation, Kaplan as an test prep guru. She's also a consultant at Becker Charitable Trust, and she's the chair of the Grants Committee of New York City Venture Philanthropy Fund. We have Sammy Sutton, who not only has a very successful business, he's the president of the Sephardic Community Foundation, and he was recently elected as one of CUNY's Board of Trustees. To the right of him, we have Rabbi Stephen Berg. Forgive me if I forget some of these. He's the National Director of NCSY. He's a Dean at JSU, and he's the National Director of Programming at the Orthodox Union. I'd like to open up the panel and have each one of you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the Jewish world. Gali?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Meyer and the JSET team, for the opportunity. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Microphone. Now? Now? It's not on. Okay. Better? Yeah. Better? Okay. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and I guess talk about something that I'm very passionate about. And this is really one of the first times that I've had a chance to really talk about this issue and really talk about how, you know, the next generation, and there are a lot of labels for you guys, but the people who are going to be in control one day, basically, can really have a piece of the action and how you can get to where you want to get to in the nonprofit world in a lay or professional capacity. So really briefly, how I got into the Jewish nonprofit world. Meyer mentioned that I've been with the Kaplan Foundation. I've actually been there a little under a year. Before that, I was with another foundation, the Harold Grinspoon Foundation, actually in Western Massachusetts, which is very innovative and what I would call really an incubator of ideas. And the way that I got to Harold, and it's really about Harold, it's about the funder, was I was working in Washington in politics right out of school. I first was a speechwriter, and then I was a lobbyist, or legislative assistant. It's not fair to say I was a lobbyist. And I quickly saw that the people who get attention, whether it's diplomats, members of Congress, other dignitaries, are really the ones who have a certain amount of resources, to put it lightly. And, you know, these are the people who are, you know, invited to prime ministerial dinners. They're, you know, appointed to diplomatic positions. And not all of them, but I quickly saw that the people who are, you know, successful business people who have made a certain amount of money, to put it bluntly, were heard in a really potent way. Now, this might not be a big, you know, mitzvah, like it's not a big thing, but for me it really was. I mean, I was a student of international relations and politics, and I really was hoping that the world would be different. And I quickly saw that these people were very, very bright, very passionate. They cared enough in an extracurricular way to really give of their time to lobby their member of Congress about an issue, and they were really heard. You know, I can come in there with my little talking points, and I would get a staffer who was on the job for maybe a year, and then really not be heard. And you know, you'd get, you know, somebody who was a little bit more senior, or somebody who was, you know, certainly had helped the member of Congress get elected, and they would certainly be heard. So I sort of paid attention to that, and that was the case, you know, on many sides of the aisle, and as I started to sort of network. And I really started falling in love with our board. I was working at APAC at the time, and I just saw really inspired people who were very dedicated. They would come in once a month to lobby. They would have these like mini seminars every month about the issues, and they were just amazing people. And I knew that I could never be one of them. I could never muster it in the corporate world. I tried. So that's when I decided to take a walk with Harold Grinspoon, literally. We took a walk. That was my interview. I had no idea what to wear or if to bring in a resume. What do you do? And he just told me about his vision. He just told me about how he really wanted to ensure the continuity of the Jewish people, and that, has a tremendous number of different definitions, which is part of the reason why nonprofit is so hard. And from there, I just started learning about philanthropy and how you can really strategically use resources. And it's not just about money. It's also about time, expertise, vision, and really focus to make an impact and to be really effective on an issue. Pick the issue and you can do it. So that's really what led me. And in terms of the Judaism piece, it's something, I was actually born in Israel. We moved here when I was younger, and it's just been an indelible part of my background, and so clearly the two identities had to be fused. So I hope that wasn't too long.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to share with you an anecdotal story that sort of got me involved in the Jewish world. I was elected president of my local synagogue youth. We were about 70, 80 men, no women, about 17 or 19 years old. And after 4 or 5 weeks, I came home and I told my family, we used to get together for Shabbat lunch, breakfast before lunch for an hour and a half. He says, "Oh, you're president now. What'd you do?" I said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" He says, "Shul. The Chazan came, he prayed, we came back with books. Everything's great. We balanced our budget, and things are wonderful." So I said, "Oh, great." She looks down. So what's the matter? She says, "You're ridiculous." I said, "What are you talking about? I'm telling you everything. The books are balanced, the place is quiet, everybody's a very nice time." He says, "You have an opportunity to do something to change the Jewish world, and you're wasting it." So I called a meeting for the board of directors, the trustees there. I said, "This is what my aunt told me. Everybody has to come back next week with one idea, one brand new idea that we're going to start working on." Call the meeting next week. How many ideas? Any guesses? Zero. So I was in Yeshiva University at the time, and I decided to go visit other Jewish communities and see what they're doing. Fortunately, within 2 years, we managed to have 100 girls joining us every Shabbat. We started a Shabbaton. At that time, there were no Yeshiva Shabbatons, just the Torah Leadership Shabbaton run by YU. We had visiting the old people in the Sephardic nursing home. We had Purim for the people. We started Friday night. What do we call the Friday night things that we used to do there?
Tish, Oneg.
Not Oneg, not Tish, another thing. Anyway, etc., etc. So I managed to, by visiting other Jewish organizations, exchanging ideas with others, I managed to open up a whole new venue in the Sephardic world that is previously completely isolated from all the other communities. So even when you find yourself in a well-groomed, organized, established organization, if you open your eyes, you will find hundreds of opportunities to take the Jewish people to the next level. And that's how I got started.
Very nice. Elliot Berg?
I can't tell you how inspirational it is to sit here with all of you. I was mentioning Gali before we were talking, before we started. When I went to Yeshiva University, it was time for my shimush, my internship. And I told the story a couple of times. And I went down. They said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to work with teens. That's pretty much what I want to do in my life. I want to work for NC Swan." They said, "Well, you can't do that." So why can't I do that? They said, "Well, we don't have an internship for that." So they placed me in an old age home. And true story. And that's how Yeshiva University gave me my start in working with teens. So for me, this is incredibly inspirational to sit with all of you and see that the university has come so far, and it's even more powerful for me to see it come as grassroots. The fact that you saw a need and you decided that you were going to fill it instead of just basically, keeping it as a conversation in your dorm room at 3 in the morning. You basically started an organization, which I think is outstanding. For myself, I originally, wanted to go into law, go into real estate, lots of different things, and then I kind of got bit by the cloud bug, and I walked in. I was 19 years old. I walked into an NC Swan Shabbaton in Pittsburgh, and I fell in love. And that's where I've been for 16 years. I think it's a great organization, and my passion is probably as strong as it was 16 years ago. When I started out as a volunteer here, as probably many of you have also gone to Shabbatons. Then when I got married, I moved out to Detroit for 4 years, working for NCSY Central East, covered the Cleveland, Columbus, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, that whole area. And for me, that was amazing because the inspiration there was Detroit is a very, very tight-knit community. It was my first exposure to Federation, to the Reform Conservative community, and that really was a base for everything else I went on to in terms of reaching out. After that, I went on to Los Angeles, covered the West Coast with some of you guys in the room, and I was also able to expand, and that's when we were able to create the Jewish Student Union, which now has 220 public school clubs around the country. And about 3 years ago, I got drafted back east. Now I hang out back in New York, and I'm also overseeing a bunch of other programs for the OU. And for me, it's just been an incredible ride. It's like I said, I still feel that same passion when I walk into this room as I did walking into that first Shabbaton. And I think that's really what's amazing. And talk about my experience. I tell you, just never give up, keep going. When you get ideas like this, you gotta just do them. Because here we are having this conversation, whereas, like I said, it could have just sat in some dorm room, as just another idea.
Very good. Let me give you guys a little background of how JSET got here. So you're right, we did start as an idea. So how do we get from this idea to where we are right now? Over the summer, I was approached by somebody, actually by a few people, who had ideas of how to change the world. But they had no clue of how to get it off the ground. They came to me with somebody with a business background and said, help me. How do I write a business plan? How do I go about thinking about this? How do I do market research? And I started to think, I said, how many other people are there in this world that have ideas that they really want to implement? They have the energy, they want to make the impact, but they just don't know how. So we started thinking. And then we started talking to people. Started saying, we had this idea, we want to create this training program to give them business skills, to teach them how to think strategically, to write business plans. But while we were talking to people, we realized we as ourselves didn't do our research. We realized that we had to start seeing, are there any other organizations doing this already? There's something similar with Jewish organizations. Many Jewish organizations do the same thing. There should be synergies. So we said, that's a good idea, and we started doing market research. And as we were doing this research, we uncovered a lot of other problems. There are IRS reports that there are over 70,000 nonprofits created each and every year. Just to give you more of a perspective, this is 3 times the rate of the business sector. With this many Jewish nonprofits being created each and every year, there's a major strain on resources as far as people, as how many people are going into the nonprofit world, and as far as funding from donors. Furthermore, donors are now demanding measures of effectiveness. They want to know that not only where my money is going, like in the Form 990s, which actually tell you how much money the organization raised and where they allocated it, but they want to know, is the money actually doing what you set out to do? So now, our vision changed a little bit. And now we're looking long-term Jewish organizations which are disciplined, focused, and strategic. That way, they will be able to use their resources more efficiently. They'll be able to be more effective and have more of an impact in the Jewish world, or in the world as a whole. There won't need to necessarily be as many of them. I want to ask the panel, what are your thoughts about these issues, and what other issues do you see as affecting the Jewish world?
Always first.
Ladies first.
So first of all, I would like to say that reading the white paper was, I was, like Rabbi Berg, I was really empowered by it and really inspired by by this, nascent idea that is now, becoming a reality. You guys are really creating facts on the ground. And I think that a couple of things struck me when I was reading the work. Number one, I think it was pretty well researched in terms of, covering the right type of, indicators. And number two, I wanted to shed just a little bit of light, and I'm not sure how much time we have, but cut me off if it's too much. Just in terms of looking at things, in a little bit more of a multiple dimension type of way. So I have two points really to make in terms of, in response to the number of nonprofit organizations, which is getting out of control. It really is, as Meyer mentioned, 70,000 a year, which is not, you can't even comprehend it. Now, but one thing that we should take into consideration is that the number is higher than ever before, but let's look at it into a context of what is government funding like. It's decreasing. So basically you've got decreasing social spending, right? Everybody wants to make, or I shouldn't say everybody, but there are certain forces in the marketplace that want to make the budget smaller and smaller, so you get, less funding for, the homeless shelter down the street, less funding for Salvation Army, less funding for, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the first thing, and I really, if anybody's interested in looking at it, look at Israel as the perfect case study. You've got a country that's turning 60, trying to become normalized in a way, right, whatever that means, and you really have a phenomenon over the last 7 years, really because of Bibi Netanyahu, who is, a student of, MIT, Wharton type of, really small government type of pro-capitalism type of way. You have education and social welfare spending, it's cut down to a ridiculous amount. I mean, there really is almost a poverty crisis in Israel. 1 in 3 kids, I think, live below the poverty line. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you have to look at that and say, well, nonprofits are trying to fill the gap, essentially. It's the third sector. You've got, public, private, third sector, nonprofit. And we're really trying, putting foundations in that category, we're really trying to fill the gap in a way. So you've got, when capitalism sort of reaches a peak, you've got an emerging philanthropic class, right? So you've got in Israel, let's say, again, to go back to that example, you've got the entrepreneurs who are in the high-tech industry and are selling their wares from Intel to Yahoo to Google to whatever, and they're bored. They're 40, 45 maybe, and they're like, okay, I've made my billions, literally, and sometimes it's billions of euros, so now it's a ridiculous amount of money. And they're like, oh my God, and look at what happened in the Second Lebanon War. Where was the government in response, right? All these people, they had, whatever happened to them, so you had one guy, actually a Russian Alyanik, who was really, really smart. He set up a tent city like that. He just said, what about the government? We can't wait for them. So that's an important consideration to take, and that's one of the things that really makes nonprofits so complicated. You're working basically, and Maya, you said the word synergy. We're working towards synergy, but there's not only synergy among the field. There's also synergy on the government level, and then there's also the business sector that must be leveraged in order to really create a movement and to really create impact. So that was sort of one of the things that is just something to keep in mind about in terms of, yes, the number is great and it's too great and there's a lot of redundancy, but that's one of the aspects that we sort of are in tune with. When I'm looking at a grant at yet another, homeless shelter, yet another program, let's say to take inner city kids to the theater. It's a really big push for some reason now. You really start to look, okay, well they're coming from the Bronx. What's happening in the Bronx? Oh, education for the arts funding is slashed across the board. Interesting. Okay, well, how can we help? So that's sort of one dimension that I wanted to bring into play. The other thing is to look at the lifespan of nonprofits. Again, taking Israel. Most nonprofits in Israel, if they last past 3 years, they're going to last. If they don't make it past the 5-year window, they're dead. That's it. It's over. So looking at that attrition rate is also really, really helpful to sort of diagnose the field and diagnose the trends. If I'm looking at a grant from an organization that's been around since 1963, and I'm looking at how, sort of like woven and adapted through time, remained relevant, that's really going to make, more of an impact than if I'm looking at a startup, even though we do fund startups and there's a place for it, for sure. But if I'm looking at a startup who, the market research isn't so good, and I have a great idea, and I want the ego to be there, and I want to be head of a foundation or head of a nonprofit, You know, it's more about what are the motivations, I guess, really. And, you know, Meyer, you said it in terms of, you mentioned, you know, creating nonprofits that are more disciplined and focused and strategic. I think those are really the three things that the business sector can bring in terms of the lessons learned into the nonprofit world. Because what happens is you get lost. You know, it's like you're driving a car and you're like, oh yeah, we have to go to the market, but let's stop here to get, you know, Bubby, and let's stop there to get the dry cleaning, and let's stop here and let's stop there. And then you lose your way. You lose your way completely, and then you run out of gas, which is even worse, right? So in terms of, you know, what we try to do a lot of time is really try to help and be focused. Just keep it simple. What are you trying to do? End hunger. Okay, how? You know, what are the different steps? You got to take a step, right? You're climbing a mountain. You got to start with a step. So those are sort of initial thoughts in terms of just looking at the sector on the whole and really thinking, you know, the real gift that we have in the nonprofit world, or I should say in the foundation world, not so much in the nonprofit world, is we've got the 40 feet up view. In some cases, a 40,000 feet view. You know, we really can see, and, you know, if I'm getting five proposals for going back to, you know, taking inner city youth to the theater in a free matinee and, you know, some sort of art curriculum, that's an interesting public indicator. What's happening here? You know, it's a powerful position to be in, to sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, what's happening on the whole? And then to sort of go back in and say, well, does this make sense as a response, or should we go a level higher? Or maybe there should be some coordination. And actually, one of the things that our foundation does is really bring together a lot of the, you know, the Jewish record labels that are all popping up everywhere. And there's a place for that, which is good, and it breeds competition to a certain extent. But maybe there's a way of really working together and collaborating and leveraging the resources. And that's really where the foundations come in, is sort of like that neutral, you know, convening place. At least that's how we see ourselves. I could go on and on, but I don't think I should. Or do we want to give, I mean, I certainly have more, but that could be offline and online.
We'll have a response section after each one of the panelists respond.
Okay.
Then I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Open to the panelists just for a couple of minutes, then open it up to everybody else. There'll be plenty of time to cover the other aspects. Sam?
Okay. I'd like to come at it from a slightly different approach. Nice music. Come to the mic. Come to the mic.
Age of technology.
Anyway, I am serving on. I've never worked on a national organization, and most of my experience have been local non-for-profits. I'm actually I'm the founder of 2 non-for-profits that opened up in the last 5 years, and one that opened up 35 years ago. They have different kind of problems, but many of you will have a chance to volunteer or join a board of a non-for-profit in your neighborhood, and I'd like to tell you some of the problems you may face and how you might want to deal with them. The problems that I'm going to discuss are the ones known as the founder syndrome, stagnating board, and nominating committee. They're quite related. The founder syndrome is one that an organization that I just finished serving as president suffered from, and that goes as follows. The people that started it had a great idea, and they took that idea, they launched it, and they became identified with that organization. However, as time went on, the organization grew. Its budget grew, a couple of new board members joined, their mission, Bikur Cholim, as a for instance. You go, you visit somebody in a hospital, great. Then one day you take the guy home. You bring him home and you find out that there's no food in the pantry. His kid's estranged from him. He fell. He doesn't know how to get therapy. And if he does get better, he needs to get a job. So I worked for Bikur Cholim that literally started from a $7,000 or $10,000 budget giving flowers to people in hospitals to a $7 million budget now, of which 90-something% is self-funded, nothing from the government. So what happened is that the original founders now see their baby grow up, started to walk, cute, started to run, But now the child is a young adult and has his own ideas. We want to open up a senior citizens, a living residence. We want to open up a mental health clinic. We want to go on. These things scare them. They're used to their child being exactly what they were, somebody dependent on them and only them for direction. Now, a lot of people give them direction. They tend to frustrate the board. And if you happen to hire an executive director and the tension between the old guard and the new guard comes out, you run the risk of losing your executive director, and good executive directors are not that easy to find. So the organization will never grow. Stagnant board is the same kind of problem, but a little less serious. Stagnant board, again, like-minded people got together, started an organization, and have been working together for a long time. They're used to each other. Now the organization needs some new board members, and I'm not talking about just fundraising. Of course, fundraising is critical. But you might need somebody for public relations, a speaker. You might need an IT guy, website, attract new members, things that call for youth and new skills. And the board is sort of like frozen locked. No, we don't want anybody new. They're all in their 40s. A 22-year-old doesn't make sense to them. And they don't want to retire. So, I mean, these are things that happen quite often and really, really make it difficult for the organization to grow. And the last aspect of this is the nominating committee. I'll tell you how it works on a lot of boards. 2 or 3 months before elections, the president or somebody will nominate the newest member of the board, go make a list and present it to us next time. That person, in fact, dares not make any changes. The last minute they come some names. Usually everybody who's been there stays there, and you stay frozen. So this is a typical problem of a Jewish non-for-profit. And if you join somebody in your community, you will see something like this. I'd like to suggest a couple of possible changes or what you could do about it. In terms of the founders, do not try to get them to retire. They won't retire. And you're going to get mud on your face like I did when I made that mistake. But there's some other clever ways that you can, or clever ideas you could do to make the changes. We attempted the following things. We tried to get term limits for our board of directors. And while that wasn't received on the first round, term limits for executives, such as president, secretary, vice president, so on, was effective and was passed. That kept the organization vibrant by allowing the key positions to change. We also tried to, and we did, have 2 levels of board of trustees. In the case of the Sephardic Bikacholim, we created a lifetime member. Lifetime member was something that was attractive to the founders. It was very prestigious. You were automatically on for the rest of your life without having to go through an election, and you could vote. You could vote. The problem with giving out the vote is you might raise your quorum and make it difficult to have a legitimate meeting. In fact, the quorum doesn't have to be set at 51% of the members. The quorum could be set at any number you want. So what we did is we added lifetime members and kept the quorum as it is. So now they come as an advantage. They know experience, and they could vote and participate, but they tend not to be there as often, but they help fill up your quorum when you need it. Another possibility, as I said, is certain requirements. If you require a certain number of board meetings, and this I recommend you take seriously. Without that, you unfortunately have to take a year off no matter what. A certain number of subcommittees you have to serve on. A certain number of hours you have to serve on these subcommittees. These kind of requirements will get people that are dead wood and not as active as they should be to move on slowly. And of course, there's the best solution no, let me change that. The first solution you're going to think about is term limits. Term limits is a good thing, but it has some dangers with it. New people sometimes don't work out. You kicked out somebody good that was committed to the organization, had a true passion, so you should be careful on how you do that, and you're going to have resistance. So, finally, what we did is we took a board of 21 people and we expanded it to 42. And that way you get young blood without insulting anybody. It's not the best solution, but it is a solution that you may have to deal with. Which brings us to the nominating committee. The nominating committee generally should be treated radically different from the way it's being done now. The nominating committee, instead of being ad hoc, should be all year round. The nominating committee should not be headed by the newest member or the most popular member. It should be headed by the strongest member of the board of directors. That person will be the only one that will be able to make changes that you may decide are required. Other issues that the nominating committee should work on, they should also be the governing board. They should review the governance, rather. They should decide make sure that the Constitution and the government's bylaws fits in with the direction that the organization has for going forward, be it term limit, expanding the board, or whatever. They should also evaluate board members. By evaluating board members, you sort of focus everybody on what their strengths are or what their lack of strengths are. And one or two bad evaluations might tell somebody that it's time to move on and do something new. You should identify the positions that are required for your next challenge, whether it's growth in membership, speaking, or PR, or something like that. And this will help you create the need for new board members, and sometimes old board members realize that it's time to move on because of that. The nominating committee is critical for the success of every organization, and when you see it's not being handled right, please try to consider making some of those changes if you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I have to tell you that I wasn't just writing last-minute notes. I was taking notes. I thought that both presentations were great, especially about founder syndrome. Actually, I've seen it a lot of places, and you will too. Just a couple of things. I read the paper that you wrote, and I thought it was great. One of the things I think it identified is something that's a trend, which I think Gali could probably speak to even better than I could. But that is the shift from, in the old days, we had a lot of Holocaust survivors, a lot of older people that would basically write a check to Federation, and Federation would just make strategic decisions as to where that money should go. And everyone is really finding the trend that family foundations are appearing all over, and that philanthropists, as you said, are really taking much more of an interest in terms of where that money's going. And there's a lot of benefits to that, and there are some scary parts of that. You know, I was talking to someone that works at a lot of family foundations, and he was talking about the fact that the younger generation is much more committed to making decisions, but on the other hand, Israel wasn't as great a priority for a lot of them. So, you know, again, there are some checks and balances to that. One thing I definitely want to tell everyone here is I think you have to be careful not to romanticize the business world, okay, because there are a lot of failed businesses. You know, if I was out there with my nonprofit, you know, and I was taking advice from Enron or WorldCom, I'm not really sure where I'd be. So I think that, you know, there's something, we always talk about, you know, treating your nonprofit like a business. There are some downsides to that, and nonprofits are not necessarily businesses for a lot of reasons, which you'll get to know. There's a great book I just wanted to mention. I wrote down the title here. It's called The Bureaucratic Entrepreneur: How to Be Effective in Any Unruly Organization. It's by Richard Haas. He basically talks about the failings of business people that get involved with government, and many times, because government doesn't work the same way as a business. A businessman many times will take a risk, you know, and he could lose a lot or he can gain. Well, you know, if you're working at the Pentagon, you can't exactly take that same risk that you might leave the United States undefended. So there are some differences there, and I think you need to realize that coming in, and there are a lot of political realities as well. One of the things that I can't just throw in a quick Talmud Torah, you like that? Torah? So There you go. I practiced that coming up here. So,
Devar Torah, please.
and that is that Rav Kook used to say that Cain and Hevel were brothers, and they used to fight all the time because they were brothers, but it wasn't until they mixed religion that they killed each other. And people get I talked about the good passion before, but people get very passionate when it comes to religious things, to nonprofits, and you have to realize that there's a lot that goes into these things. I just want to mention, just in terms of you, and what you're going through in terms of trying to correct some nonprofits and help them out. Number one is, I think you need good mentors. I know for myself, going through life, I've had great mentors. I've been very, very lucky. When I was in Detroit, I had someone I named Rabbi Steve Weil, who's a pulpit rav on the West Coast, also has an MBA from NYU, who's great for me. When I was in the West Coast in Los Angeles, I had Mayor May, who's executive director of the Wiesenthal Center. And here, I'm going down the block. Every 2 months I sit with President Joel. And you need good mentors to kind of tell you exactly what's right, because a lot of times you have a gut, but you need to check it with someone that might be more experienced. And I think also, as you're looking at nonprofits and you're trying to understand what works, what doesn't, I give you two pieces of advice I give every one of my guys that goes out and hires people is you have to have humility on the one hand, which means realize that you're still young and you're still trying to figure out things and you may not know everything and therefore have to be really open. But on the flip side is you need to be relentless, and you need to really go and try and find out, and someone can't give you an answer, and go to someone else and to get that answer. I'd like to just give you 3 examples, of what I've seen in terms of my experience of trying to bring, so to speak, the business strategic planning approach to the organizations and the nonprofit that I work with. The first thing I think is important here, and I think it was alluded to, is you have to focus on goals, not means. Okay, we become very attached to means. When I became in charge of NCSY, we had a program on the West Coast called the NCSY Caravan. It was for public school kids going up and down the West Coast. And when I came in, we could take 40 kids. We only had 30, and we lost a tremendous amount of money. So I shut it down. I canceled it, and boy, did I get heck. I mean, I had emails, and one of our staff people wrote me an email, and she said, "You don't care about public school kids, you hate Jews," the whole thing. I thought people get passionate. So I called her up. I said, "Look, we lost, I think it was $70,000 or $80,000 in this program." I said, "If I gave you $70,000 or $80,000, how many public school kids could you get for me?" She said, "Oh, if I had $70,000 or $80,000, I can get hundreds." I said, "Okay, so what are we talking about?" I said, "Secondly, I looked at the list. I said, only one of those 30 kids came from your region. It wasn't even from your city." She said, "Oh, well, it was really hard last year." I go, "Look, if you're not going to support it, so and that, to me, that was really important to basically lay down the ground rules that if something works and it's productive, we're going to do it, but we're not going to be married to it. We're not going to be wed to it. And if that model doesn't work, then you move on." And I'm coming from an organization that's been around 53 years, and there is a lot of founder syndrome and a lot of history, and people come to me all the time. Well, what about this program? Oh, we used to, well, times changed and it wasn't working as well. I'll tell you, in terms of NCSY, we have struggled with metrics and measurement in terms of how do you determine success, and it can't necessarily be in the shamot and those types of things. And it's hard to measure, and we've been working on this, and we've kind of come up with the fact that first you have to have measurement. You have to know how many kids are going to your programs, which programs they're going to. You have to be able to track your participants really well to know what's going on. And the second piece, which we're implementing now is the measurement, which is we've assigned point values to everything that we do. In terms of, we've decided which programs, by evaluating them, are more productive and less productive. In terms of, someone goes on a paintball event, that might be 1 point. If someone goes on a Shabbaton, that might be 5 points. Someone goes to summer program, which is 6 weeks, which is longer, that could be 20 or 25 points. And that way we can look at a kid and say, he's traveled through our system and he's gone through these types of experiences and come up with some kind of numerical value, which is important because we operate in 154 communities. We have 250 full and part-time employees. We have to basically identify who's being effective and who's not and make some decisions because there's only a finite amount of money. And the last thing I just want to mention is that we have an organization, which was mentioned at the beginning, called the Jewish Student Union, JSU. which is, I think it's just an outstanding, outreach organization. We're in 220 public schools. We go into the public schools and we deal directly with unaffiliated teens. We see about 15,000 unaffiliated teens every week, and our job is we're a portal to the Jewish community to get them involved somewhere else. And it's really us and the Christians in the public schools. That's really who's populating the clubs. But I got to tell you, when we started it, I was raw. I had this idea. I wasn't really sure, could it work, could it not work? And I met and I bonded with a philanthropist who remains very close to my heart. His name was Jack Gindy, Jack and Rachel Gindy. Jack Gindy passed away, Olav Shalom, in Los Angeles. But I was, kind of wet behind the ears. I came to him, I said, look, I have this thing. I think I can get into the schools. I have this idea. And, we came to him for funding, and it was not a tremendous amount. It wasn't mega funding. But, we bonded. He heard the idea. He liked it. And he had confidence. And, today, like I said, we went from, that first public school club in Los Angeles 5-6 years ago to 220. And I think that this speaks to, I think Gali alluded to this before, is you need to look at track record. Meaning, people, when I get a resume and I'm interviewing someone and I see that every year or two they've gone someplace else, that's a red flag. You need to look at nonprofits, and it's more than nonprofits, because successful nonprofits have an individual or individuals behind it who are extremely competent, hardworking, and will get the job done. And you need to look at their track record. And I would imagine, and again, I'm not, Jack Gindy, but I would imagine when we sat there, that's kind of what he saw, Basically everything that we had done had gone really well, and he saw some promising guys that had a great idea, and therefore he was willing to invest in it. So it's very important, with all your strategic planning and all your evaluations, don't lose a human touch. The bottom line is, Dell Computers is still all about Michael Dell. And there's so many other organizations like that, and CEOs, and you have to get someone who is a leader, someone who's competent, someone who's going to push it forward, and if you see that person, you got to get behind them.
Very interesting. We really had three very, very different but views of the Jewish world. From Gali, who looks at grants, she notices that a lot of organizations really need to be focused, and she had an example with the car analogy. You have to know where you're going, otherwise you're going to end up everywhere else. You have to be very, very focused and very strategic. Mr. Sutton, who's been involved in multiple Jewish boards, you need a burning platform. He said people get involved on the board, especially the founders, they don't want to leave. It's not like you necessarily have, the guy's not bringing in X dollars, not perform X, Y, and Z, so we can fire him. You need to have certain either term limits or specific governance laws that actually dictate how you're going to make sure that your people are effective. That's actually something that Rabbi Berg tapped into also. But he actually tapped into a very different area, being from the organizations. He first said that nonprofits are very different from businesses. He said you also have to know the difference between outputs from inputs. You have to see if your organization is actually being effective, not necessarily just based on the allocation of money and worrying about the money. And also be ready to change models if it's not working. Don't keep beating on that dead horse. I thought that was very, very interesting. He also said that it's very important to have a mentor, and passion sometimes maybe even get into the way, which is actually very interesting. I was actually just reading a book by Pat. I actually forgot the name of it. That's not so good. But he talks about a case in 1967 in Biafra, Nigeria. Rebels took over the city of Biafra, and the people were starving. A group of persons got up with passion, and they said, we're going to feed these people. They went, they brought the food into the town, said, great, we're feeding X, Y, and Z number of people. Like we've heard a lot of nonprofits say, look at what we do. But what was really happening on the ground was they had to pay a tithe to the warlords, and actually escalated the situation. The warlords bought more weapons and escalated the war. More people ended up starving. I actually wanted to, before opening up to everybody, I actually wanted to hear the panel's input on the question of how do you go about solving a problem such as that, or any problem, how do you go about thinking about it strategically to make sure that something like that doesn't happen?
Reverse order?
Yes.
Well, first, I just want to say I'm totally against warlords. I think that's a bad thing to support them in any way, shape, or form. But I'll say something that might be surprising here. Look, part of leadership is making decisions, and I got to tell you something. Sometimes we don't get it right, and I'll be the first to say that. But what's important is to be proactive and do something. And having said that, is sometimes we try something new and it fails. And what happened there, again, I don't know all the circumstances, but I'm sure it was not clear cut. All I can say is what I alluded to before is, number one, is you need to have mentors and you need to speak to people. And if it's something complex, most decisions I make in a day are not terribly complex ones. There's a lot of politics, other things that go into it. But for the complex decisions, number one is you have to have a mentor in terms of being sharp politically to know what the ramifications are. The other one is, and I could really say this in this room, you should also be speaking to rabbis and rabbanim and seeking out their guidance. I'm very close with Rabbi Sobolovsky, who I speak to all the time about all kinds of issues. And by the way, we may disagree in the end or whatever it is, but at least I want his perspective. And that's what goes back to before. I think you really need a lot of humility to basically say, I need to feel this out, to figure out, to get advice from someone, and to move forward.
Right. It's not always possible to be 100% sure you're going to be successful. We opened up a drug intervention program called SAFE, and we had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Millman, who is on at least 5 national boards, including the President's special advisor to the drug program. So we asked him, could you give us a guideline of what percentage of drug addicts we get to stop we would be deemed successful? He says there's no such thing. What are you talking about? How are we going to know what we're doing? He said the reality is success with doctors across the United States, no matter where, is around 70%. And success with people from African American descent with broken homes living in the ghetto is much lower than 10%. So you have to decide where you are. How could that be? Well, a doctor has a lot to lose. If he continues being a drug addict, he'll lose his practice, his money, his family. The other fellow doesn't have a lot to lose, so it's very hard to get him to change. So there's nothing wrong with taking on a project that you're not exactly sure it's going to be successful, because sometimes what you think is going to be, might be a failure, also ends up being a success. For instance, we opened up a Torah Studies Center, which we knew would fail. We started, this was, 30-something years ago. Studying Torah wasn't as hot as it is now, and it was an insane idea. It really was crazy. We rented a store, we got a rabbi, and so on. We knew that by the end of the year, we would close. And in fact, there wasn't enough money, and by December, January came, people started dropping out. But March, April, May, people came back, and then in June, the synagogue, the main synagogue in the community, comes to us and say, we want you to move this Torah center to our place. No, we can't move that, it cost a lot of money. We were broke. Well, if you commit $340,000 a year, we'll consider moving to you. We were spending about $30,000. So they committed $310,000 a year, took the program way beyond our imagination. So success and failure is a movable target. If you have your heart set in the right direction, if you're not always successful, you will be successful in the long run.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was also taking notes for the interesting things that you guys said. I think ultimately what's important to remember, and this is something that I try to remind myself really every day, is that organizations, governments, families, what have you, are made up by people, right? Obvious. So it's about the person, really, in terms of, when we try to diagnose a problem or to see if, to weigh something, we really look at the motivation of the person, just like, we've all alluded to the integrity of the person, the values that they're coming from, their heart, in a way. I'll give you an example about how, in diplomacy, I remember one of the biggest things that was so shocking to me was that if a diplomat had a bad day, U.S. fill-in-the-blank ties could be a jeopardy. Really. So I'll give you an example. Boris Yeltsin, not the, wonderful leader in his own right. He was slated, I think, in the late 90s to meet with the Irish Prime Minister. So the plane lands and it's on the tarmac in Dublin, and it's just sitting on the tarmac in Dublin. Nothing is moving. No one is, departing. And they were like radioing into the airplane. They were like, "What's going on?" Yeltsin is drunk, completely drunk. He, drank who knows how many vodka bottles on the flight over. He was completely hammered. Okay, this is the leader of Russia at the time, they were going to discuss, economic ties. They had to sit on the tarmac for 6 hours, waiting for him to sober up. Meanwhile, the food got rotten. There was going to be a big state dinner. The ice sculpture melted. I mean, it's really sort of ridiculous to think about. But politics, governments, organizations, they're made by people. So the point I think that we're all trying to allude to is in terms of relationships, really looking at the relationships and looking at, and I think that this is really another plus for the nonprofit world if we're trying not to romanticize the business world. In the nonprofit world, you can make mistakes and it's okay. It's can you admit the mistake and how do you move from there? That's really the test of the integrity in the person. So I think in terms of, looking at different, diplomatic decisions and different choice points in your life and whatnot, I think it really depends on the integrity of the leader. Also, the team. I think the point about mentors is excellent. And I think, I was never in a position to be just a chair of anything except for this venture philanthropy thing. And I'm looking for a co-chair because I know that I'm going to be able to be much more complete, and the organization is going to be able to really get more if there's another person coming from, definitely a different experience, because we all have different experiences, really filling in some of the blanks that I have, really learning from that experience.
Thank you. Now we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. If you have a question, call on you, please walk up to the mic. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
I was wondering how religiously your programs are supposed to get kids or adults more into Judaism. Because, of course, the physical body is very important in taking care of the sick. I wouldn't take away from that. But as Jewish nonprofits, where's the Judaism behind it? And how do your different places deal with that? Thanks. Do I stand here? Well,
I'm sorry? Look, I think that one thing you have to realize is that a Jewish community needs all sorts of different things. When you're a community, it may need a mikvah, it may need a shul, it needs a school, it needs, there's so many different components to that. And look, one of them, is the Bikur Cholim, when we're sitting here talking about Jewish spirituality, I have to tell you, I went last night to a Seudat Soda, which is a Thanksgiving meal, of a very close friend of mine, someone that I actually work with, whose daughter had cancer, and spent a lot of time, actually a couple blocks from here at Columbia. And I have to tell you that to minimize Bikur Cholim as only healing the physical body, I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. I could tell you that he talked to us about Chai Lifeline, all the Bikur Cholim that came by, and as he's sitting here with his wife, and then they happened to have a very challenging case. It was they just couldn't figure out what was wrong because it was such a rare disease. as a matter of fact, he had his doctor was there, and he remembered how, at one point he turned to his doctor and he said, "What is that building across the street?" She said, "Well, that's our Center for Cancer Research." He's like, "And no one in that building can tell me what's wrong?" He was like, really, going out of his mind. And he said that, the people coming over and over and over again, and there's a spiritual crisis that goes along with that. When you're thinking, and even for the most religious Jew and most committed Jew and a Jew that's full of faith, when you're going through something like that, and even more so when it's not you and it's a child. He said last night that the Bikur Cholim institutes, and that it could have been also yours. I'm not sure. There was just a ton of them really helped him. So I think that for most Jewish nonprofits, there is that ability. I can tell you, for us, we obviously work with teens, just try to get them connected to Judaism, because so much of the Jewish population is totally unconnected. So that for us is very, very spiritual. But anyone that does that kind of spiritual, it works both ways. If you do spiritual but you don't care about their physical well-being, then you're not doing your job. If you're trying to work with a kid to become closer to God, and he gets sick and you don't really give him a call and you don't really care about him, that's not working. And vice versa also. If you're worried about the physical, but you don't deal with the emotional and spiritual crisis of faith that goes along with that, that doesn't work either.
I'll take a shot at it. There's a machloken in the Gemara. What's more important, Talmud Torah or Gemilut Chesed? It's actually, if you go to the Holocaust Museum, it's pretty much the opening line as you walk in here in downtown Manhattan and Bryant Park. So the conclusion of the Gemara is Talmud Torah is more important. The reason, because Talmud Torah brings the Gemilut Chesed. So if you stop and think, it's a genius answer, because if the means is Torah, and they say this is the means, of course, the end is more important. But they say, no, Talmud Torah is more important. So if you study that for a while, you're going to get closer to understanding the answer that you need for your question.
Okay, I'll take that a step further. We actually, and that was really beautiful. We actually, I guess, are more of the Leibovitch school, the Yeshayahu Leibovitch of, action will lead to spiritual, what have you. And, in my previous job more so, my funder was very, very secular. Very secular. To say that he was Reform is probably not even anywhere near where his practice was, if you can call it a practice. But he had experienced anti-Semitism growing up. He's 79 years old, and he had experienced it in the United States. And that shaped his Jewish identity. I mean, he was basically like, I'm marked, and these are my people, and there's an inherent collective experience that has been really special, and I want to give back in whatever way. So for him, it was about a Jewish identity, which, what does that mean, Jewish identity? And it can be personified, certainly through Talmud Torah, certainly through, the mitzvot, etc. So I think the way that he really took it, and my current employer does too, is really about the action that will lead to a certain just ingrained sense of, when you're listing who you are as a person, Jew is going to be one of the top three. I'm a woman, I'm a, et cetera, I'm a Jew. And so then the question is, how do you get there, right? So that's really where innovation comes in. And so I'll point to two programs. One is Birthright Israel, which I hope some of you know about. And that's really, that was my previous funder, Harold Greenspan, was one of the founding partners. And that was really the sense of, people will become inspired and really moved in every dimension when they experience, Eretz Yisrael like it's supposed to be, see the people, see the miracle, really witness what is going on. And so, you have that 10-day postcard trip to Israel for free for 18 to 26-year-olds, all with really attractive people around you and, on spring break or whatever. And it sounds trite, but that experience is really transformational to a lot of people, and you have a lot of people coming back who, first of all, a lot of people don't come back, actually, who stay. And second of all, a lot of people who want to go and, become a rabbi, study more, become a little bit more Jewish in whatever way that means, whether it means more observant, which I know a lot of them actually do, and it's something that, if they didn't daven in any way, shape, or form, they're going to come and, during the Yamim No'aim, they're going to really take personal stock of themselves and really be, give it their all. And that's something that we've actually seen in it's been reported to us, let's put it that way. The other project was, that I had a hand in really contributing to starting, was something called the PJ Library. And it's basically this idea that my former employer had of, this special time when a family first becomes a family, which is basically, a married couple has their first kid. And what happens during that time when, you start really becoming, you have this instinct of like, you want to be a teacher to your child and you want to impart to them things that are important to you. And so one of the things that he said is they have to impart Judaism in whatever way that means. And so what we came up with is this idea of sending them, again, for free, because we're talking about really unaffiliated people who live in the sticks, frankly, sending them for free once a month a Jewish children's book. So that bedtime, PJ pajama, becomes special, becomes, so like around the Chagim, you have a Pesach, book or a Rosh Hashanah book or a whatever book. And so I think more in those types of initiatives when we're looking at innovation and we're looking also at can this compete in the marketplace, I mean, very frankly, and I think that's actually something that NCSY has done really well, is you have to become relevant, right? We're hyper-consumerized society. So are you going to, let's take children's books. Am I going to reach over for the Disney, My Little Mermaid book because it's packaged well and it's probably, on sale? Or am I going to read my first shofar blowing book, whatever, that usually isn't packaged so well, and we judge books by their covers, let's face it. So really looking at the quality of the product and also, again, to take from the business more the lingo, that market research of, where is there a need? How am I filling that need? Is it relevant? Can it compete? And then just launching it and seeing what happens. And if you fail, you try something else. I mean, as Rabbi Burke said, you're not wedded to models, because if you're wedded to models, then, you've got a sack of, something weighing you down and you're just not going to survive.
Thank you. Does anybody? Well, good question.
So it was mentioned that thousands of nonprofit organizations open and start every year. Do you think it's more beneficial to start a new one, be another one of 1,000, or to fundraise, like have a fundraising organization and give to those nonprofit organizations?
Okay, all right, back to me. That's a great question. That's something that we, on an ongoing basis, on literally a case-by-case basis, struggle with. I think it really depends on the organization. I'm more personally, not talking on any sort of, level, I'm more of a less is more. If there's already an organization that is in existence doing, X, Y, and Z, let's go and really try and support that organization and really make it work. I will say, however, that, as it's been said, in terms of, founder fatigue, board burnout, all of that stuff, it really exists, and sometimes you just have to scrap it and say, guys, we're starting anew. Or sometimes, you wait until there's a transition point and then you try and really, lead to a renaissance. But my sense is usually to really stick with the people who have a certain track record and really work with them to, it's about skill building, really. I mean, that's something that the Jewish community doesn't have a lot of, and I think that's why this is a really important forum. We have a lot of conferences on, the Jewish, studying Jewish texts, or, Jewish study on the population of how it's affecting Eastern Europe, et cetera. How do I market? How do I do marketing? How do I write a press release? How do I write a business plan? Same thing, none of that. And I think that's really where, we're trying in a very small way to give that to our grantees. And that would lead me to say, somebody who's new, really to look at what the different aspects are around the formation of the new thing.
I think one of our problems is is that we're Jews. And I just mentioned the Christians before, but I was one of the rabbis in L.A., Rabbi Muskin. So he was speaking on a dais with a preacher from one of the mega churches, and they introduced me as 10,000 members of his church. And Rabbi Muskin turned to him, he said, "And no breakaways," which is, it's a little bit, our culture to want to break away. And I'll tell you something else. I just had dinner with the head of APEC on the West Coast, and he told me that one of his donors we said, I want to go meet with the Christians. I know they're very supportive of Israel. I want to talk to them. And he said, look, they're not Jews. They don't have a meeting to have a meeting to have a meeting. You come to the table with what you got or not. But that's our culture. That's who we are, and we have to be very careful about it. About the fact that I agree. I think you absolutely have to work through existing. Look, I started one of those 7,000 501c3s, those nonprofits, a couple years ago with JSU, but I had a reason for it. NCSY was strictly Orthodox. JSU is open to and working with much more of the other denominations. We had to do that, but it was only because there was nothing else servicing the public school clubs at the time, and that's ultimately has got to be your check. Is anyone else doing this right now? And then I think you absolutely have to try and work with them. Don't kill yourself. Again, talk to your mentors. I tried to do everything. It's not working, and then make that decision. But I think definitely the first gut reaction should be to support what exists already.
I think it's directed towards more Mrs. Cooks. You mentioned, I don't know if your organization specifically, but about proposals from public schools or like branch schools for theater, for whatever. And I'm sure there's many Jewish organizations that deal with social action and other things that have to do with non-Jews. And not to sound harsh or anything, not judgmental, but where's the justification for dealing so much and putting in so many resources into the non-Jewish world when the Jewish world still has so many problems? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually a really good point, and that's also something that we constantly struggle with. There was a study that just came out, and I forget the place, the Jewish something or other for research something, out on the West Coast actually, that basically studied the larger foundations from 2001 to 2003 and showed that 80% of their gifts, Jewish foundations, go to non-Jewish causes. So you bring a really excellent point. And that's really where we get into the world of, I am the donor and it's my money. Really, very crassly, but very, very real. I could speak to my foundation right now. Our mission states that 50% of our funding should go to Jewish organizations. So let's say we give $20 million a year, which we don't. I wish we did, but let's give $20 million a year, so $10 million goes to Jewish organizations. And the rationale for that is, the family, the Kaplan family. Mr. Kaplan, Stanley Kaplan, made his money, in education essentially, and that was in the secular world. And that's something that he has, straddling those two worlds, has been something that he's done his entire life. And really the family felt that this was the perfect balance for how they wanted really the legacy of this man to be. And that's really why the foundation was funded. So that for generations, and this is going for perpetuity, we're going to be, forevermore. We have 3 generations on the board right now, and we're planning for, who knows how many more, that is really going to speak to, really the person that he was, or he is, I should say, in terms of his existence. Now, my former foundation, Harold Grinspoon, former employer, gave everything to Jewish causes. He said, I want my legacy to be working within the Jewish community and really helping, it's basically about, a people renaissance, essentially, making sure that Jews marry Jews and they raise their kids Jews and, everyone lives happily ever after. So you bring up an interesting point in that it's the foundations don't necessarily respond to the need of a certain segment because they're looking at, they may be looking at a different angle, essentially, and the priorities may be different, and the stories of who is in charge, essentially, would be different. Michael Dell went into computers, but there was a really, really big problem in X, Y, and Z, so why didn't he try to go in there as well? So he decided to stay, focused on that, or to stay within his specialization. It's sort of it's a faulty analogy, but it's basically, it's about the background of the person a lot of times in foundation world, and that's why, there really isn't necessarily rhyme or reason apart from, how you can be true to yourself with, what you've worked for all your life and wanting to give back to society. So he said, you know what, let's do all of society, and 50% will go to Jewish, which I should mention is actually much, much higher than most Jewish organizations, much, much higher. Most give 5, 10, maybe 0 a lot of time. You look at, anyway, yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I agree with Gali. I had Stanley H. Kaplan as my tutor for my SAT scores. He himself used to come in those days, and he's a fantastic guy. You have to have passion and convince the donor to give to what you believe in. There's tremendous competition for the donor dollar. You cannot tell people what to do. Nothing. It's just that simple.
Ditto. Yeah, that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. I'm really against being negative about anyone. I don't think it serves anyone. I've had problems with outreach organizations on certain college campuses telling guys who have gone through our system, whether it be JSU, NCSY, then they made a decision to go to some school in Israel that it wasn't religious enough, and it had a horrible effect on them. It really embarrassed them, and it was just stupid. But you know what? The bottom line is the religion is perfect. The people are not. And I think that there has to be a certain realization that just like in business, not everyone is the nicest person, and nonprofits is the same thing. The same way I talked about romanticizing business, I'll say the same thing about nonprofits. People think that everyone that kind of give their lives to go into nonprofits are tzaddikim and angels. It's not always true. There's a lot of political hits. There's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of other things which I hate to bring up now because you're all inspired to go out there. But the bottom line is it is difficult, and it's hard sometimes to keep that moral compass and to make sure that you're doing the right stuff in the face of those types of things. But the bottom line is you always have to do the right thing, all the more so if you're in a nonprofit and you're doing this type of work. And even if you take the hits, I've gone through certain situations where we've let people go. That's a part of any organization or business, and we've gone out of our way to give them 3 or 4 months to basically find a new job. In many cases, we've helped them find a new job. One time, I remember when I was younger and I was really frustrated. We let someone go and we helped him find another job, and we gave him severance. And we really took care of him. And he badmouthed us all over town. And I was talking to someone who was a little bit of a mentor, and he said, "Look, you got to do what's right no matter what. And even if you take a hit, and even if it hurts, you have to do what's right." And that's what we have to focus on. And again, when you're going out and you're trying to figure out which organizations to support, you have to take a look at that. How do they relate to other organizations? How do they relate to other people? Great, they're making 80% of the people they come in contact with religious. Yeah, but they're turning off another 500%. The people, just incredible numbers. And I know organizations like that they really if you want to be religious, great. And if you don't want to be religious, they'll never talk to you again. And then it really it damages people. And I come across these people. I come across people that are anti-Orthodox because of experiences they've had at certain places in Israel where everything was great until they decided that maybe they didn't want to be 100% Shomer Shabbat, and that was it. People dropped them. And I think that is not exactly what God intended for our religion. I'll cut it there.
I was wondering if the panelists could shed some light on the burnout phenomenon, quote unquote, meaning that some people feel they can't make a living in Jewish nonprofit and feel like they need to go to more for-profit industries.
Yeah, very true. I was at a meeting earlier this week, last week, never mind, about the phenomenon of men leaving the organized Jewish community? Apart from rabbis and you know, more leadership positions, where are the men going? And this is more in, you know, different streams, but and you know, it wasn't so hard to know that the men are going to where there's a larger salary, basically. And because we're still, you know, we still live in a society where, you know, basically the men will provide. And it's a real issue. It's a real issue. And there are some organizations and really consortiums of organizations and funders that are looking at, you know, nonprofits are always going to have nonprofit salaries. You're not going to be making, you know, a six-figure salary at a junior level position, any nonprofit. But what are the sort of added perks that can be added to really enhance that basket of, you know, different pluses that you can get? You know, I will say that, you know, being a Jewish professional, you're part of a family. Sometimes it's a little dysfunctional, and sometimes it's, you know, it's inappropriate in certain ways. I mean, you do have this almost understanding that your time is not your own because you've really married yourself to a cause. And a lot of us feel that way. I mean, there is passion. That's why we'd be there. I mean, again, it's not for the paycheck necessarily. But there also are certain boundaries that get crossed that I think now people are looking at and saying, you know what, this is inappropriate. You know, working on Shabbat, you know, until like 30 minutes before Shabbat, it's not appropriate for any organization that calls itself a Jewish nonprofit. So I guess my response is that, I mean, you really hit on something that is, you know, a sector-wide problem, really a challenge that people are looking at much more, I think, innovatively now. I think there are fellowships that are coming out that are offering to give very, very large fellowships for anybody who wants to get a graduate degree, basically a full ride plus, you know, living expenses. That's definitely something that, you know, on a professional development track, that would be applicable. I think BBYO has, like, they pay for your MBA. I mean, it's, they're playing with some models. And there's also leadership development, a real shift in the field toward a leadership development mentality. And that's actually, I should say, both in the Jewish and the non-Jewish world. I mean, basically what we're up against, so to speak, is a leadership gap. There's going to be a major leadership gap because the baby boomers are a huge generation, and then there's Generation X. I think there are 35 million of us and about 95 million of them. And so clearly, if there are enough, you know, I mean, you do the math, right? They're going to stagger out, we're going to stagger in, maybe Generation Y will come in there as well, but we really need to prepare this next generation, and that's why this forum is so great, for, you know, hopefully a quantum leap in real meaningful leadership. And that's something that also is sort of, they're trying to toy with, you know, packaging that and sort of, you know, as the incentive for staying in the job that may be burning you out, but maybe there are, you know, conferences and fellowships and, you know, future growth opportunities that might help. I should mention also one more thing. There is a movement of donors right now that is working on providing their money managers to give advice to their professionals. So in other words, you know, a lot of us, myself included, have our money sitting in like a savings account, maybe accruing, 3%? So why not have the money guys come out and make you 14%, right? So it's stuff like that that's sort of, there's like a little innovation in terms of, you know, getting access to the wealth, but not the actual wealth necessarily.
Right. I think the real goal in life is, if you had to put it in one word, would be, if you want to know what do you want for your child most, and certainly happiness comes out on top of most people's lists. So many people choose a profession like non-for-profit or a teacher or social justice work because they want to make a difference in life, and they know it may not be as financially rewarding as business. In fact, consistently, year after year, the happiest people on earth turned out to be the Danish. And when they checked to identify the single reason they could figure out, it wasn't the best health system, it wasn't they lived the longest, they're not the wealthiest, et cetera, they figured it out, or they attributed it to one thing more than anything else. And obviously it's a more complicated answer than this. But simply put, managing your expectations. If you could manage your expectations, then you could chase the goals in life. and do what you think is the best way to add to this world. That's easier said than done, but that's really how to achieve happiness while pursuing your goals. The other way is to marry somebody rich. That works too.
I didn't do that. That would have helped in retrospect, but I was young and I fell in love. Yeah, I think just for myself, going through NC you talk about burnout. We have people we're all emotions. We're just a basket of emotions. So for us early on, I had a regional director I worked for, and I had a regional director I worked for, and I watched him. There was a girl who he had basically worked with from public school, and she went to Israel, et cetera, and he had raised the money to send her to Israel and done all these things, and then she got married, and he didn't even get an invitation to the wedding, and he was just devastated. He really was. And it was there and then that I basically decided that I was never going to expect a wedding invitation, and that for me it was about what I was doing for God. And not so much, get that kid another notch in your belt, et cetera, et cetera. I do what I do because I believe in God and I believe in the Jewish people, and it's not going to be based on individuals, because sometimes, they disappoint you, and they don't mean to at all. It's just, that's the way life is. So that's number one. Number two is, I keep harping on this point, but, having a mentor outside of your organization, it's so key. You go into a person, a mentor that you're close with, and you go out to lunch with them every 2 months, and they'll make you feel like $1 million, and they'll make you feel normal. And, you see all these things going on, you think you're crazy, and you sit with them, they're like, no, you're talented, you're good, you're young, and you need that. You literally mentally need that, and that's why it's so important. Again, I think you should have some mentors within your organization, but always have at least one mentor outside your organization that can kind of, give you that chizuk.
Any other questions?
Sion.
Yeah, actually.
Oh, we have a question.
Sion.
So for over the past hour, I really felt like I was on the shoulders of giants. So really, thank you so much for. I thought a page would be enough, but I wrote so much more. I had a question. All you look like dedicated religious Yehudim. Was there any situations where you had to kind of bend what your beliefs were, or did you always stay steadfast in regards to not bending your religious beliefs and approaches?
So I guess my level of religion, obviously, it's all relative, but there were definitely times when I had to bend my Israeliness, for sure. And that was very difficult because, for me, they're completely tied. But there was a time in D.C., I was working in D.C. right at the beginning of the Second Intifada and at the Embassy of Israel, and, there were protests every day throughout October and November, when we thought it was just, a flare-up, and then all of a sudden, it lasts for 6 years. And it was very hard. It was very, very hard. I think that, I'd really been blessed with growing up in somewhat of a bubble. You grew up in Israel. I grew up in Tel Aviv some, and then we moved to Minneapolis, which is a whole other story. But, you'd sort of, you find ways, and my parents, I think, just like any other parent, really wanted to support us and make us feel like, we weren't odd and not necessarily, sick the crazy realities of this world on us. And that, you sort of start grasping that when you go off to college and when you start encountering people who aren't necessarily, like you and have the same background. And that could be Jews and non-Jews. But I think in D.C. that was really the first time when I saw, I remember I wore Magen David. I wore, like a pendant. And I remember thinking to myself, do I hide it? Do I tuck it in the shirt? What do I do with it? Because I was going out of the embassy. There were probably 500 people who were, with the, like you see sort of in front of the Israeli consulate every once in a while near the UN. And I remember having like a real moment of, I cannot believe this. This is ridiculous. I remember it was a real, existential. I had been writing speeches about this, so, but when you write speeches like Arafat's bad, we want peace, it's sort of static, that kind of language. But, so I did not tuck in the Jewish star. It was too small probably to see, but it was that kind of, that kind of decision making. And there have been times also of, being in certain situations where there are people who don't support who you are, and you sort of have to learn how to build coalitions around those people, and be very, very diplomatic, but not compromise your integrity while doing it. And that was throughout Washington. I mean, it was really, you've got people from an entire spectrum of the, political spectrum, and obviously you've got missions from all over the world who are there. And again, when you stand near a sheikh at some sort of reception for something, and you're at the Kennedy Center, and you're like, this person wants me dead, and there's no question about it. There's no question about it. So, and the way that I've really dealt with it is, I'm not necessarily one of these people to engage, I guess. It's much more, unless there's, a way of engaging. But, I was sort of proud of myself for not tucking in the thing, and I sort of walked out proudly after that. And they sort of phased out. I mean, that's the other thing that I sort of learned, is that there really is a long-term thing here, I mean, I remember getting out of school and being like, we think semester to semester, maybe you have, friends, and they fall off the map, and it's sort of like there are these like short-term nuggets of life, and then once you're out, and, and I had a Bachelor of Arts degree, which is already like, what are you going to do? You sort of realize that things sort of have a way of, there's a trough and a crest and a, so maybe your enemy of 5 years ago is not going to be your enemy 5 years from now. I mean, and your friend 5 years ago may not be your friend 5 years from now. And I think that's really what I learned throughout these sort of encounters, was just to, you always sort of have to check in where people are. I mean, countries will be countries. You're sort of clear on that. But, yeah, I think that's more of a compromise that I had to negotiate.
So, your question was regarding nonprofits or personal, or what did you mean?
In regards to nonprofits, let's say you had a decision to make, and the means of getting there, basically, you would have to, possibly, I'm not going to go to say, oh, you have to go to a reform conference or something like that. But just in general, did you feel that the Jewish nonprofit world was compassionate and kind of respectful to the fact that Orthodox Jews or religious Jews? I remember Randy was saying he had to deal with AJWS in regards to Shabbat hours, or he had to do there's different obstacles while entering the Jewish nonprofit. Well, we're not everybody's on the same page. You might have to go to a non-kosher restaurant or maybe not to your standards. In general, you confront different things where wearing sitting on maybe with the sheep or interfaith. Are there any obstacles which come up in the Jewish nonprofit world which you might question or?
The obstacles do come up, but I think in today's day and age, it's not really a major challenge. Most people respect, other than strictly Orthodox, most people respect other people's beliefs, and it goes along. I mean, somebody had to catch that. Okay. Most people respect other people's beliefs, and they compromise. And from ordering kosher in a non-kosher event, etc. That shouldn't be a challenge. But as a guideline, I'd say to you simply, if this was published, what I did, or how I conducted myself, was published on the front page of the New York Times, would I be proud or not? And if you answer that question the right way, you'll never make a mistake. I want to answer the rabbi. No, he never compromised.
Look, it's, I'll just say it's here, whatever, off the record. I mean, it's tough to be Orthodox in the non-Orthodox world. There's a lot of stereotypes out there. A lot of them are of our own making. We're not as open as we need to be in terms of as a community. I could tell you when I started JSU, there was one point where we had something that was called YPAC. It was all the different youth groups in Los Angeles who would get together once a month. And I finally lost it on them, because they were giving me a hard time about opening this, You're Orthodox. What's your secret agenda? You know, I go, look, I gotta tell you something. I said the Orthodox are beating me up because I'm open to you guys. You're beating me up because I'm Orthodox. I said someone has to choose. I can only take it one way, and yeah, and it was tough, and it took time to basically show people, and we were very open in terms of we gave our list over to everyone. We really want to just get these kids involved with something. So in terms of that, you know, there's a lot of loneliness out there, but you know, if you're smart, you can work through anything. And if you're a good guy, you know, I'll tell you, I went on March of the Living. We had a great group. I talked about before, Detroit. Detroit Federation was wonderful. I've never really been in a federation like in Detroit. We did a March of the Living. There were 15 Orthodox, 15 Reform, 50 Conservative, and 15 Israeli kids. There was a Reform, Conservative, Orthodox rabbi, and then there were 2 educators. I was one of them, NC SY, and one from NIFTY. And everything, and we had all kinds of issues. Everything we tackled, we worked through. You know, they had a talent show, and one of these girls, you know, wanted to sing. So we said, what do we do? So we're like, okay, you know, right before we were about to start the talent show, we said, okay, it's time for Marav. Any of the guys that wanted to go Dav Marav walked out. She sang. We came back. Oh, whoops, we missed the first act, you know. And we did a lot of things like that, you know. And my best friend was a guy, Danny Sampson, who's Reform on the trip, and it was just, it was like that kind of constant. You know, there's an article. I don't even know where it is now, but we had this compromise. We were in a boat and spot, and we said like it's a double-decker boat. And we said, okay, this is going to be, you know, like Jewish music, and the mixed dancing will be upstairs, and the separate dancing is going to be downstairs, and that's what we'll do, right? And there's a guy, Paul Yedwab, he's a rabbi of Temple Israel, one of the largest Reform congregations in America. So we're walking down to the boat together, and we both look at the boat, we're like, oh no, and like together we're just like, there's only one deck, you know, like we worked out this great compromise. It didn't apply, you know, and to his credit, you know, and again, this speaks a lot about Detroit. Paul's like, okay, we'll do separate dancing, you know, and he has a speech. He was published in the Detroit, I think it's called the Free Press, where basically there was a point where the song Mashiach came on, and Paul Yadwab was a Reform rabbi, and Rabbi Bertrand, who was our conservative rabbi, and myself are sitting there dancing in the middle of a bunch of guys, you know, and he was just talking like how amazing it was that we were able to kind of work through that. So again, it depends who you're working through. I tell you, I did not necessarily have that experience in LA. I found a much tougher community to try and work things out like that. It's much easier in a lot of the smaller Midwest communities where you really need each other. So.
Wow. We've covered so many things. We started off talking about what are the current issues. We started talking about the organization and strategy. We talked about boards. And then we really got into getting some awesome personal advice. I was thinking throughout the session of how am I going to close this? I realized we've covered so many topics, I don't think I could properly close this. But what I can do is actually just wrote out a chart, which we'll try to put it together. And I think it starts with somebody who's passionate. Somebody has a desire to change the world. But they have to be humble. They realize that they don't necessarily know everything and have to find a mentor. And as they develop, they have to start learning some skills. And these skills aren't necessarily business skills, because business skills are specific for the business world. There are certain other skills for the nonprofit. As Rabbi Berg said, don't glorify the business world. And as Gali said, it's very important to be strategic, to be very focused, to ask the right questions. What are we trying to accomplish? Is there anybody else doing it? How can we do it better? Look at the entire scenario. Who will be affected? How will they be affected? And as Mr. Sutton said, we need to have a burning platform. Because some people get involved just because of ego, because they want to feel good, but they don't necessarily perform. So you have to set up governance terms. And as Rabbi Berg said, it's very important to have measures of effectiveness for a few reasons. As we started the panel, in the introduction, we said there were 70,000 nonprofits being started every year. Major strain on resources, people and money. But if they become more effective, they can actually make more of a difference and use those resources better. But I think what's most important is for us who are going into the world and do want to make an impact. Me and my friends started this organization because we've seen so many passionate people who wanted to make an impact but just didn't know how. So we started speaking. I started actually with Gali just a few months ago, and she started putting me on the right path of how to think systemically and how to go about creating an organization, how to go about thinking about things. So we've gathered there for you over the next few months a few trainers who both have been in the business world and within the Jewish nonprofit world. We have a session on market planning, somebody who helped launch the Fox News network. We have somebody for strategic planning who's in the financial world and also launched a Jewish nonprofit called Dur Hadash. We have Gali Cooks teaching us about systemic thinking, the due diligence she does on Jewish nonprofits. She didn't mention here, but her organization, if I remember correctly, is also involved with Slingshot, which does due diligence on over 250 Jewish nonprofits. She's going to speak to us on how do you analyze the Jewish nonprofit, what works and what doesn't, how do you go about thinking about it. Its passion is fantastic, but how do you use it properly? Then we go into writing a proposal. How do we get our ideas down on paper, as far as keeping ourselves focused, and then going out and getting funders. And lastly, the legal issues involved and how to think about the entire system. I'm going to give our panel a round of applause. Panelists have any last comments?
Thank you.
I do. I do want to stress the point that Rabbi Berg made 3 times about a mentor, because I didn't mention it. And in fact, I was blessed to have 3 mentors. One of them was my grandfather, who more or less brought me up religiously while my father traveled extensively. The next one was my father in business, ethics, helping friends. And the third one was a man that Hal Dweck's father actually edited a book on. The book is called Joseph. I urge you to look for that book. I think it's available at Amazon online. If not, Maya or Ezra or somebody could get that book, and you'll see how one person could make a huge difference in this world. Thank you.
For more information, see our website, jset.weebly.com.